The 2022 Rams were a little bit of a disappointment. There's really no way around that, right? They came off a Super Bowl win, and then they failed to make the playoffs. This is the episode where we break down those 2022 Rams. We discuss what happened to them on the field that kept them from rising to that greatness. And we go deeper than just everybody got hurt. Well, that did happen, but we break down the why there was problems before that and how they can fix them moving forward. So check out the 2022 LA Rams. Welcome to Local Football Flavor, connecting the fan bases of the NFL.
Disappointment. It's a word that we use in the English language to talk about things that we thought were going to be better than they actually were. And that's the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams going into this season had so much hope. They had a quarterback and a wide receiver tandem that was the best in the league. They had a defense that, for all intents and purposes, was the best in the league. And they came off a Super Bowl win. You would think a team coming off of a Super Bowl win with all of that talent basically returning would do a little bit better than 5 wins. But here we sit, the Los Angeles Rams, 5 wins, no playoff berth. And Joe, I'm going to talk a little bit about this team, and you can come in whenever you feel like it, because I've got a lot to say, but none of it is particularly good.
Fair enough.
So, going back and watching the Rams season, I can't imagine, and this is coming from a Steelers fan, I can't imagine being a Rams fan, because as we catch games during the season of the Los Angeles Rams on the East Coast, and going back and watching these games, there was nothing enjoyable about these games. And to tell you the truth, there's probably a lot of better things to do in Los Angeles than watch the Rams this year. And I would rather be sitting on a beach. I would rather be sitting on my porch drinking a beer than watching the Los Angeles Rams this year. Because as I go back and I watch these games, there is no indication that this team had an offense. And where this is particularly glaring, and we're taking out, we're including injuries in here, but we're also pointing out pre-injury as well.
Yeah, you need
This is a team with Cooper Kupp who lacked big plays and yards. They ranked 31st in the league in yards per play. Yes, is that due to injuries? Of course. But even if you average out their quarterback play with John Wolford, Bryce Perkins, and Matt Stafford, and Baker Mayfield, they still only accumulated 280.5 total yards per game. That ranked 32nd in the league. Even when Matt Stafford was healthy, even when Cooper Kupp was healthy, they only got 3 wins. They played 9 weeks together. So you're telling me that this team, who won a Super Bowl prior, couldn't come out of the gate? Yep. Matt Stafford, of course, was the biggest question mark this season because of his neck injury prior to the season. So a lot of that came to play. But Joe, I want to bring you in on this. One of the worst parts of the Rams that is indicative through these stats is the offensive line. It was basically like running through a sieve. The pass rush was, the pass rush on them was strong, and they could get to Stafford, Wolford, and Bryce Perkins really fast. And there was no run game to speak of until the final 3 games of the season. So what did you see? Did you see something different? Because as I look at this is a bad team the way it played this year.
Yeah, so let's start with the line. When the year began, Stafford obviously had the neck issue. And the Bills in particular forced him to try to go over the top. We weren't going to give you the underneath stuff. And the template was set from day one that you're not going to get cheap underneath stuff, particularly trying to shut down Cooper Kupp on his quick little slants, quick little outs. And that's where the Bills really focused. They also got pressure on him like crazy. So when we look at the early half of the season, we have to acknowledge two fundamental facts. All of the skill players on the Rams at one point or another got massively hurt. Starting with week one, Stafford comes in hurt, and then also Cam Akers comes in hurt. Cam Akers in his has basically is the tale of two seasons. First half of the year, he's overrunning holes. He's clearly not 100% himself compared to what he was the year before the injury. He's a shell of himself. He's not hitting the holes right, was the most notable point, though. There would be a hole and he'd overrun it and miss it. And then you can't get a positive play on that. To me, as much as the offensive line was a question, to me, the biggest problem with the Los Angeles Rams truly comes down to the drama that was around the Rams. When you look at the running back room just by itself, Akers is misperforming due to mental mistakes and also physical limitations.
Mm-hmm.
He starts basically wanting out. They don't play him when he's healthy for a couple of weeks in the middle of the
Mm-hmm.
year
Yep.
around the trade deadline when he's trying to get traded. Granted, he wasn't 100%, but he was healthy enough to play 2 weeks before he made these comments. So
Mm-hmm.
drama is the best way to say. They outright cut Henderson. And that essentially comes out of nowhere. Yeah, was Henderson productive or anything?
No.
No. But most people just put your guy on the IR. They don't cut him in the middle of the year. It was a very perplexing move that the Rams
Mm-hmm.
did. And to me, this is the biggest thing when we look and try to judge what this line did. There were holes. And once Stafford went out, the quarterbacks they had in were just deers in the headlights. I mean, you could have put them behind any offensive line and they were getting sacked. So I can't really blame the Rams. They obviously didn't do things easier. They were behind a lot. The game strips were rarely in their favor. But the way that offensive line was constructed, that's not my number one fear with this team about when I got to say and point blame. The first thing I got to recognize is the injuries entering the year and the mishandling of them, particularly with the running back room, but also with Stafford. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I understand that he's not 100%. You enter in that season to say, you know what, guys, he's missing the first 4 games. We're accepting it. We want him to get 100%. It's a different year. Then you take those lumps early in the year, and it's like, all right, we're not done. It's just this was all part of the plan. But at the end of the day, he gets messed up. He never really recovers. And then he started developing bad habits. He started getting afraid to be hit. And they are not in a division where you can be afraid to get hit. You got Watt in Arizona. The Rams are the only team that like don't stop him well. Like Watt owns the
Mm-hmm.
Rams.
And the
Seattle,
line sucks.
yeah, yeah. And then obviously the Niners are pass rush city. So, Bob, I want to give this to you to look at it from the defense perspective because this Rams team, this Rams offense, as soon as Stafford went out, it's hard to give it a true grade. The backup quarterbacks were nothing, and Baker was running on the fly.
Well,
Granted,
actually,
hell of
no,
a
no, no, no,
final
no.
drive.
I disagree with this.
Okay.
It is fair to give them a grade because you can look at this from a couple different viewpoints, but the main viewpoint and the main lens you can look at this through is points scored.
Yeah.
And there is no difference between the amount of points they scored with Stafford and the amount of points that they put up on the board with John Wolford, Bryce Perkins, and Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, by the way, led them to 51 points with Cam Akers. So
Mm-hmm.
when I'm looking at this team, I can grade them because they were not good with Stafford because of those injuries. I'm going to blame that not good being on the injuries, but they were just generally not good. And then the second half of the season, they accumulated 2 wins in the next 9 games, which was almost equal to the first 9 games win total. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not putting this all on, hey, Stafford was down. I'm putting this on all like, hey, your players didn't do the things that they were supposed to do. Now, I
And
will
they
give
imploded.
this. I will give this to the Rams. The Rams defense is still good. The
Mm-hmm.
Rams defense is pretty stout on the interior with Wagner and Donald. Donald needs a lot of help on the defensive line. There is minimal pass rush, and this can be seen when almost every single run play that a team will go will avoid Aaron Donald in the middle, will avoid Bobby Wagner in the middle, and they'll just go outside
Mm-hmm.
because there is zero pass rush on the outside. Now, to keep that from happening, what the Rams would do would be to bring their safeties down into the box. They'd bring Taylor Rapp down in the box, bring it over whoever else in the box, and even have Jalen Ramsey blitz because they knew they needed to get some sort of rush in order to make this work. Now, Wagner graded really well in tackling and a lot of other statistical categories.
Mm-hmm.
Ramsey graded well in his categories, but Ramsey's only one player. Wagner's only one player. If I
And
don't
when
have to
Donald
pass,
went out,
if
yeah.
I don't have to pass it to Jalen Ramsey's side or wherever he's at, I can just go somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a non-factor at that point in time. It was like when Darrelle Revis, when you figured out that you didn't have to pass it towards Darrelle Revis's direction. Well, of course you have a good chance to be successful. Now, what I need to point out though, and this is something that is a stat again, looking at what has happened in the games and then going back and looking at the stats from the year is really interesting to see how, because you watch it with one lens when you're watching the game, and then you want to come back and you want to kind of to study the
You watch it
stats a
differently
little
with
bit
the
and see
coach's
what
film.
happened.
That's right.
Now, they were a better home team.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird to say this. They were a better home team. Now, one of the reasons why they were a better home team is that they were dead last on the road in plays given up, which meant that the defense was on the field more away from home than
Mm-hmm.
it was at home. It was the second best team at home in terms of plays given up per game. The difference was 10. 56.9 at home, 67.1 on the
Mm-hmm.
road.
That's a lot.
When you look at that, that is 10 extra plays a game that your defense is on the field. That is 10 extra plays where your offense isn't on the field. Well, what is this telling us? We just saw in the Chiefs game. We just saw what the Eagles did. The best defense is a good offense. If you can't stay on the field because you can't, the Rams were one of the worst teams in third down percentage and one of the
Mm-hmm.
best teams in fourth down percentage because they had to go for it more because they were so far behind the sticks most of the time that even when Cooper Kupp had a game that was like 127 yards receiving, you look at the stats, he's the only guy that had any yards
Mm-hmm.
because you had guys like Tutu Atwell, you had Allen Robinson who wasn't getting the ball, you had Van Jefferson who was hurt for a while and coming back. So, yes, injuries play a big role, but good coaches take what they have and make it better. And Sean McVay did not. He did not take it. He took talent, and the talent showed out on games most times for them to be, in it at least for a little while. But the coaching was bad. And just like you said earlier, you're putting a lot of blame on the way things were handled. I'm also putting a lot of blame on Sean McVay because there's a lot of, we'll wait and see what happens. Instead of making something happen. And this is why, yes, Sean McVay won a Super Bowl last year. But this is why those trades are going to start to catch up. This is why it's going to start to catch up to the Rams. And yes, right now at this point in time, do I have the Rams returning to potential playoff berth next year? Yes, I do, because I believe that they could fix this offensive line because the other pieces are there. Is it likely to happen? Maybe not, because I think Seattle's a little bit better and a little bit more well-prepared going into next season. Striking stat, by the way, the Rams and the Atlanta Falcons, who we dogged pretty hard the other day, both had similar times of possessions throughout this season. Also, Steelers, just like the Rams, fighting a losing battle on offense. The team couldn't score.
Mm-hmm.
Defense could only keep up so much. What's going to happen? Well, you're not going to win games. The Steelers were lucky enough to squeeze out a couple more wins, But Rams had 5. Steelers had how many?
Steelers had 9. The
Right?
difference between the two of them, and really, was their strength of their schedule. The Rams played a much harder schedule, especially overall, than the Steelers did,
Yeah.
and that needs to be recognized. The question that I have with the Rams moving forward, and to me, this is going to be the big thing, is obviously we know that the Rams are all about having a really strong front line, and then their backups are lesser. That's how they built it to a greater degree than any team had. And they won a Super Bowl 2 years ago. When
Mm-hmm.
you get the ring, it's worth it. But this is when we see Donald go down, we see Kupp go down, that the things are going to start adding up as the year goes on. So what my question is at the end of the day was this a team that flat out just wasn't capable because there wasn't the talent left? And then when Akers came back, they definitely looked better when Akers came back healthy. Or was this a team that didn't want to play football anymore?
No,
And to
this is a
me,
team.
that's the question, because there are points in the season watching the Rams where it looks like they didn't want to be out there.
I can answer this
It's sad to
question.
say, but it's like watching the old Cleveland Browns.
It's twofold. Yes, these games were unenjoyable to watch. And it's a twofold answer because both of those things are true. Where you start you want a Super Bowl. You come out the
Mm-hmm.
gate, you lose. You win 2 games, then you lose. And there was a stretch where I think they lost like 5 to 7 games in a row
Mm-hmm.
while Stafford was healthy.
Out
You
there, but dinged. But yeah.
you get disappointed. Now, through this time, if you realize that you don't have the talent at running back, or your running backs are hurt, or something's going on, you're going to then over rely on your best skill position players like Kupp and like Stafford was doing. Now, the talent level hasn't really changed. Allen Robinson should be good. I mean, OBJ versus Allen Robinson. OBJ is talented, but they didn't have OBJ all season last year either.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the running game that they had last year. The same players. It was the same players.
Henderson was I don't understand that story.
And so you look at the defense. You added a great defensive player, and I think you took away a couple of pieces. Well, what you see happening here is that the Rams had only 8 or had 8 total games, not only 8 total games where they completed less than 20 passes. You have Matt Stafford, who last year was throwing the ball 50, 60 times a game. I think one time he had like 65 pass attempts.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is it's not is it the talent level there? The question is, why was the offensive line so bad? Because Stafford can't sit there in the pocket and complete 60 and throw 60 times a game if his neck hurts, his shoulder hurts, and you can't protect him. And then the other thing is that if you look at the rushing attempts per game, it's not high at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're playing John Wolford, Bryce Perkins, Baker Mayfield, in order to win a game, you need to run the ball because those guys can't carry you. And unfortunately, like the Rams with John Wolford did beat Seattle, who was the better team. I don't know what happened there, but this is what we're talking about, is that yes, talent level did dip when Stafford went out at quarterback. That is undeniable. I can't even fight that. But even before that happened, there was zero talent dip. But the problem is that when you feel like all hope is lost, a good coach will push you in the right direction. A great coach will push you in the right direction. And Sean McVay was passing the buck back and forth. He was allowing guys like Jalen Ramsey to come out and say, y'all, we sucked. Like, we sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out and said that point blank. And McVay's like, yeah, we didn't play that. We played bad. We need to make... Don't be diplomatic about it, McVay. You're young enough but old enough to know that you're the coach, that you're the leader. And this is the same gripe that I have with certain other guys in the league. And it's Sean McVay. Is he actually a good coach? Or did
Yes.
he just have really good players?
No, he is, but this is a different. There's a different
We'll see
element
next year.
of
We'll see next
putting
year.
players in the right spot of the field versus controlling them in the long run. You can't take a Super Bowl ring away from the guy. I
I
do think
did. I
that there
did.
are fair questions to say, hey, this went sideways, this went sideways fast. But I also think that there's a certain way of saying this team's used to playing for championships. They're used to playing in playoff games, and this ain't going to happen.
But they're
And
not
maybe we'll
used to
just get ready
playing
for
in
next year.
championships.
Under
They,
McVay, they
they
made the playoffs 3 years in a row.
yeah,
And
but they
it was
also made the
obvious
play.
by October that wasn't happening.
But Joe, if memory serves me right, they also were in the playoffs at one point in time, and John Wolford was the quarterback.
I They might have mathematically had a chance this year, but realistically, Stafford coming out as a shell. The reason, again, I don't blame the offensive line as much as you do for this team. And the
Every
reason
Rams fan blames the offensive line.
I understand that, but they were playing at about as big of a disadvantage you can give an offensive line. Again, there was no denying what this offense was going to have to do. They were throwing it short, forcing it into bad places, and the running backs weren't hitting the holes. What do you want? The only way this thing truly opens up is if you try to push the ball downfield, so not everyone's in the box.
I
It's
want
the
to
only way
coach.
it opens up.
I
And
want to
the
coach
real
that.
problem with the Rams, in my opinion, they don't have a number 2 receiver. They certainly don't have a number 3 receiver. And as soon as Higbee started fading off the planet, that offense stopped. To me, when Higbee stopped getting his 8 catches a game, is really the turning point of where this offensive line, on the perception of this offensive line, fell off the floor. I'm not saying it's the Taj Mahal and the greatest offensive line ever, but I'm also not saying it's bottom third.
Oh, it's a shanty town. It is. It is a 1920s middle of New York City Central Park shanty town, dude. This offensive line. When we look at how of the bad offensive lines on the field, if you go and you look, this offensive line is probably going to be graded around the same as Atlanta was, and Atlanta actually could run the ball. Atlanta's
Mm-hmm.
problem was with their quarterback. Well, in in for the Rams, the reason I bring this back up to you, and the reason I'm kind of arguing against your point here, is because a good coach will go, and Sean McVay has earned it because he's won a Super Bowl ring, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's earned the right to say, hey, y'all, I'm going to go out and get a guy because our guys is just not working. Well, why are you still rolling out Darrell Henderson if he's getting 30, 40, 50 yards a game and you're not moving the ball? Why is John Wolford still being rostered? Why is Bryce Perkins seeing time? Why are all these things happening? And I get why some
We
of
live in a
them,
salary cap league, Bob.
but I get it. I understand it. But as the point that I'm trying to make is that if a team has given up like the Rams looked like they did through most of the season, then you've got to put fire underneath your team. And when everything's going well, like what went well for the Rams the prior season, everything's hunky dory. But when we talk about adversity, and when we talk about is this coach capable of overcoming adversity with inferior players, it is very clear to me that Sean McVay needs talented, good players, and he can figure out what to do with them. Right? He still won 5 games. He
Mm-hmm.
can figure out what to do with talented players. But when your players become untalented to the degree that those players are,
Well, I'm going to end this on 2 final thoughts here, Bob. Greatest coach of all time basically cannot make the playoffs in a consistent run once Brady left. And on the second note, no one will say that Kyle Shanahan down the road is a bad coach. Wins the Super Bowl, then went 3-13. That team's right back on track. I think McVay is much more in line of the types of coaches of the Shanahan that will pick it back up. Just acknowledge it was a lot of injuries, and I do fully believe that they will be either winning that division or second in that division and in the wild card next year.
It will depend on McVay.
It'll depend upon Stafford.
I don't think Stafford will be there by midseason. But we'll talk about that at another point.
Click right here to watch more action from the NFC West. And over here is our next episode in review, the 2022 Carolina Panthers. The Rams might have lost everyone because of injury, but they sold them. See how well it worked out over here.